I've lived in what most people would regard as liberal cities my entire life. I have worked with, been friends with, associated with people from what would be called the LGBTQ plus community almost my entire life. And that, of course, stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer or questioning. The plus signifies other sexual orientations and gender identities not listed in the acronym, such as intersex and asexual. Although I am heterosexual myself, or whatever they call someone who prefers to be with someone of the opposite sex, I've been around this enough to where I have an informed opinion about it. In other words, I'm not some hillbilly living in the extreme conservative corner of the country, completely shielded to this culture. It's been kind of in my face for a lot of my life. So I'm not going to shut my mouth and pretend like I don't have thoughts about what I see, because everyone's got a right to think what they think and have their observations. And we don't get anywhere by completely censoring ourselves and not having conversations, and because we're afraid of being attacked or bullied for what we really think about stuff. And that goes both ways, not just in the direction that you want it to go in. You know, that's free speech. Free speech is, as Elon Musk recently said, and I'm paraphrasing, allowing people with opinions we don't like to express themselves. And at the center of that is the understanding that we're all going to say something someone else doesn't like at some point, probably more like every day of the week. And if we're going to sit here and say, try to make laws that certain people can't say certain things because, I don't like it, obviously that gets dangerous very quick and ultimately leads to the destruction of free speech. So if we're all really for free speech, we should all be willing to listen to the other side of what we think on an issue. Otherwise, we're just hypocrites. We're not really for free speech. We're for censorship. Now, let's just first acknowledge the very obvious fact that most people are heterosexual, meaning most men are attracted to women and most women are attracted to men more than they are attracted to their own sex. And that makes a lot of sense, because I wouldn't be here and you wouldn't be here. None of us would be here if men were not attracted to women. It is the union of man and woman that creates human beings. And this is something I would have felt really silly stating, 10, 20 years ago, because we're living in a climate now where the establishment media and the propaganda media has inundated our minds so heavily with this idea that we need to incorporate alternative views on sexuality and even race. So I feel like I'm stating the very obvious. Of course, science, and I've spoken about this on some of my material, talking about the Antichrist and AI and all this. Technology is being used by people jealous of nature or God's ability to create, that they want to sort of co-opt it and get in between and let technology be man's, tool to play God and give birth without heterosexual union. And that's obviously antithetical to everything, natural. But that's a different topic, of course. So, it behooves everyone to encourage heterosexual culture, to put it at the top of a pedestal, because, there would be no gay people, there would be no straight people, there would be no black people, there would be no white, there would be no people if males and females did not come together and make babies. So so when you talk about trying to elevate other sexualities, to the level of heterosexual, it's kind of an anti-human stance. And the fact is, the LGBTQ plus community, according to the numbers, is a lot smaller than the heterosexual quote unquote community. I asked ChatGPT, which of course is always going to be slightly left-leaning. And some of the figures they came up with was 5.6% of US adults identified as LGBT overall between 2021 and 2023. 2% as gay, 1.3% as lesbian, 2.5% as bisexual. The percentage has been rising, especially among younger adults. And there's two ways to look at that last sentence there. One way to look at it is, well, society's becoming more open to non-traditional sexual roles, and therefore people feel more liberated to be who they are. But the other side of that coin is, well, we all know that, in advertising, that the more you expose someone to something, the more likely they are to pay attention to it, and then the more likely they are to buy. This is why your emails are full of spams every day, because the philosophy is, let's shove it in your face as much as we can, and that'll increase the odds of you buying. So, the way propaganda works, the way the establishment media works is they shove in your face the things they want you to integrate into your mind and into your society. And shoving LGBTQ plus material into your face constantly every day isn't the liberation of the LGBTQ community. It's the suggestion and even unnatural forcing of that community into your face. And children being very influential, young people, who might become very obsessive about something for a few months or a day or a year and then grow out of it. When I was a kid, I had, my brother and I had posters all over our walls, movies that we loved, basketball players that we loved, whatever, cute chicks that we thought were hot. Teens can be very obsessive, but they grow out of these phases, even exploring whether they might be gay or not, here and there. That's to a degree normal, of course. Anyway, even with these, what I would call probably inflated figures, we're talking about a very small section of society. Now, we live in a country, America, that celebrates diversity and celebrates the fact that everyone has a voice. But, the way democracy works is the mob rules. Demos means the mob, ocracy means rule. And the reason we vote is to see who wants who to be, representative of us. If 95% of the people vote for one person and 5% vote for another person, well, obviously, the majority of the country is voting for the former. So we don't sit there and go, well, what about the 5%? Let's go ahead and elevate the 5% to the same level as the 95%. That way, 5% of the population can have an equal say against the 95%. I mean, does that make any sense? The majority of what people want in America is generally what they should be getting on paper. I don't think they are. I think it's all corrupt. But that's the idea. And this is why I think it's important that states have their own rules and regulations and are to a certain degree sovereign from the rest of the country, to a certain degree. Some probably would argue that states should be completely sovereign and that the federal laws shouldn't apply to the states, but that's a whole other can of worms. But the thing is, having the states being able to run themselves to a degree allows a bit of nuance to exist from state to state. In other words, if there's a lot more LGBT identified people in one state versus another, well, that state can cater their laws more to their own people. So it's a pretty good system when you think about it. It's not perfect, but let's look at some other countries. As of 2025, there are about 65 countries where consensual same-sex sexual activity is still criminalized. Did you know that? Many countries in Africa criminalize homosexuality. Africa. In other words, it's illegal to be gay there in a lot of the countries in Africa today. Several in the Middle East, a lot of the Muslim countries, in fact, I think almost all of them, homosexuality is illegal, including Palestine, Gaza. Did you know that? Next time you see someone who identifies as liberal holding up a sign and protesting to free Gaza, remind them that it's illegal to be gay in Gaza. I don't know what they do to them. You hear stories, they throw them off the roof, they stone them to death or whatever. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, all Muslim countries are not tolerant of homosexuality. Iraq, Iran, Ethiopia, Egypt, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, United Arab Emirates, Syria, Somalia. Who's from Somalia that's in the government right now? Always talking about the oppressed. Well, she should look at her own country where it's illegal to be gay. And I bring up Palestine because the Israel-Palestine conflict is still very hot in the air right now. And there's this overwhelming impression from the media that Democrats and liberals are on the side of Palestine versus Israel. Again, it's illegal to be homosexual in Gaza. I don't see Israel on this list. So that's kind of interesting. I asked ChatGPT, was there ever a specific law prohibiting homosexuality in the United States? Short answer, no. The United States never had a federal law that explicitly prohibited homosexuality by name. But yes, many states had laws that effectively criminalized homosexual behavior. So isn't that interesting? In our country, the United States, we've never had a federal law that explicitly prohibited homosexuality by name. Now, of course, there's lots of arguments you can have about this. Look, no country is perfect. Every country has ugly history. But ideally, we want to get better with time. And the United States is a country known for freedom and diversity of opinions and thought and lifestyles. But there is no perfect system. Of course, you're going to find bigotry, and of course, you're going to find misogyny and crime and things like that in America, despite what the Constitution says, despite what any law says. But the thing is, we've got to try to be better. And overall, most seem to agree that we're the best country in the world, and that's why everyone's trying to come here. And you can't, on one side of your mouth, say that, oh, the United States is so cruel to immigrants. Well, why do they all want to come here? If their own countries are better than the United States, why are they trying so hard to get here? It's not because we're a worse country from where they're from. They're telling us with their actions that they prefer to be in the United States. They want to come here. It's a privilege to be here. Did you know that being gay in the United Kingdom was illegal up until 1967? And in 1967, it wasn't even completely legalized. It was only partially legalized. I found this out when I was reading Rob Halford's book. He was talking about how it was illegal to be gay when he was a kid, when he was younger. I was like, wow, England seems so, intelligent and superior and, morally correct and tolerant. And yet it was illegal to be gay there as recently as 1967. And in fact, full legal equality didn't occur until the early 2000s, when the UK had fully decriminalized homosexuality. So again, is America the worst country on the planet? Is America just this really intolerant place in comparison to other countries? No way. It's easy to stand there and say, this is what I think is wrong and this is what I feel like I should be able to do. And it's easy to just say those things, but to apply them to the entire country, the entire world, and say and declare this just needs to be a thing, it's not that simple. You need rules and regulations. Otherwise, it's just chaos. It's just tribal warfare. And in tribal warfare, the strongest and most depraved will get their way, ultimately. And that's not a society I want to live in. Is that a society you want to live in, where you go outside and people are getting raped in the streets and people can break in your house and steal all your shit and take over your house just because they're stronger than you? I mean, that's a lawless society. You need structure. You need rules. You need laws. And it's never perfect. You got to keep trying to be better all the time. As far as the Bible goes, we know that the Old Testament is pretty clear on the topic of sexual relations, between the same sexes. In Leviticus, we have what I believe is the most quotes from God of any part of the Bible. And again, this is the God of the Old Testament. This is Yeshua. This is before Jesus Christ. This is before God had his son come down to the earth and absolve us of our sins and sacrifice himself. So you got to understand, when you're reading the words of God, this isn't someone you're going to have like a debate with. Okay, this is God, and this is what God's telling you, and you don't argue with the Lord. Okay, you can and see where it gets you. Now, Leviticus is known for having, it's just basically all rules. This is what you do, this is what's holy, this is what isn't holy. And a lot of it may sound very strict and out of date today. In fact, there's a pastor I follow who jokes, that he's wearing an outfit, a suit with, many fibers in it. And that Leviticus or, one part of the Bible says, thou shalt not wear, clothing of different fibers. So there is a little bit of an exception there with some of this stuff. There's something called the New Covenant, and there's certain tolerances that Jesus had in the New Testament. For example, healing on the Sabbath. The Pharisees had gotten so caught up in the rules and regulations that they lost sight of why the rules and regulations were there in the first place. And it's not about contradicting the Lord. It's about understanding why those rules exist in practical life, and why they might exist for a people of a certain time, and how people of another time, certain things may not apply. And so, to paraphrase Jesus, he said, well, if one of your goats fell into a ditch on the Sabbath, are you not going to pull your goat out of the ditch? You're going to let your goat just rot there and die because it's the Sabbath and you're not supposed to do any work? I mean, just pointing out the ridiculousness of the degree to which the Pharisees, basically just were trying to use the rule as a way to exercise their authority and power. And it became more about their authority and power than the traditions were there for originally. They got lost in the power. And that is why Jesus went after the Pharisees the most out of anyone. And they are the ones who ultimately had him crucified, the traditional Jews of the day. They had Christ crucified. And we know that Jesus hung out with a prostitute, Mary Magdalene, and he also hung out with the woman by the well, who was an adulterer. And they wanted to stone her to death, the Pharisees. And Christ stood up for her. He said, "Let he without sin cast the first stone." In other words, he's not saying it's okay that she sinned. He's not saying, let's say she was gay, okay? She had relations with other women. Christ wasn't saying that's okay what she did, that she's gay. He was saying, if you're going to throw a stone at her and stone her to death for being gay, you better do an inventory of your own life. Are you sin-free? Maybe you should be stoned to death. You see, one doesn't have to approve of another person's behavior, but one can still love that person and know that person and be friends with that person. And I try to do that. I try to not judge people, let the Lord be the final judge. I don't have to agree with people's lifestyle choices, and I think there's this stereotype of Christians, and sometimes it's probably true, where, they're constantly wagging their fingers. But the thing is, if you come from a place of love, and it's a fine line, because there are times you do have to be firm. You have to stand up for your beliefs. And that gets tough because you will meet resistance, sometimes even violent. And, it takes a courageous person to be able to stand up for their beliefs in the face of bullying and peer pressure and, the pressures of society when something's popular. I mean, right now, it's very acceptable in the establishment media to be queer and to even have sex changes, to have operations, to cut off certain body parts, to take hormones, to just decide, oh, I'm going to be the opposite sex today. This is accepted, a lot more than it used to be in the establishment media. And there's even a little bit of a culture of like, yeah, you better accept it. Otherwise we're going to, destroy your character. And I'm not going to pull up the numbers here. You can do that on your own if you like. But the gender affirming care industry, the sex change industry, the drugs involved, the pharmaceutical industry is making a killing. I mean, because basically once you start transitioning, as they say, you're hooked on drugs for life. The different hormones and, I want to have more hair on my face, or I want to have less hair, or I want to look this way or that way. I mean, you're the ultimate drug addict. Drugs used to be like say no to drugs. Now it's like, give me all the drugs you can till I'm dead. I mean, look at the figures of how many people die from pharmaceuticals every year, and look at how it's gone up over the years. I mean, this is not the right direction for the human race. The establishment media likes to talk about how, when you deny these poor children their right to change their gender, the suicide rate goes up. Well, what they don't talk about is the suicide rate among people who go ahead and get the sex change. Again, I don't have the figures right here in front of me. This isn't intended to be all exhaustive, but it's just questions to ask, things to look into, because the mainstream media is encouraging this. They want the destruction of the nuclear family. They want the promotion of the pharmaceutical industry. They want confusion and chaos in society, and they're putting a happy face on it and using words like diversity and inclusion, things like this, all these happy words, and all they're doing is trying to destroy you and me and us and our society. I'm going to end off with a real life example here of something that affected me quite a bit. I knew this guy, very, very beautiful man. I loved him. I looked up to him. He was older than me. He looked kind of like Lemmy. And I don't mean I was not attracted to him. I just loved him as a person. He was a great guy. Kind of an associate in the music scene. I'm not going to say who he is, but I never saw him with women. I assumed he was straight, but I really didn't know. I didn't think about it that much, to be honest. It didn't matter that much to me. But one day he started posting pictures online of himself in a dress and wearing makeup. And it was he looked shockingly bad. And at first I kind of laughed because I thought it was a joke. I thought he was actually joking. I thought he was trying to be funny. I think there's even pictures of Lemmy, wearing a dress somewhere, taking the piss, as they say. But turns out the guy was not joking. He was in the process of, I think, getting castrated, getting his penis removed, and taking hormones and stuff, and changing his name to a woman's name. And maybe obviously if you're older, you've had your whole life to think about it. But if you're chopping off body parts, you're a very sick person. There's something wrong with you. You need help. Obviously, I don't relate to that mindset. But when I see someone that I care about and someone that I admire just mutilating themselves and then expecting me to clap, and I watched and people were applauding this guy and treating anyone who criticized him or said anything against what he was doing, treating any word of discouragement as you're only allowed to clap for this. And I don't know, I think that just shows the sickness on the internet, how it basically promotes mental illness, claps for it. And I won't do it. I think when you clap for someone that is cutting off their genitals or sewing their vaginas shut and trying to become a man or whatever, I think when you applaud this, I don't think you're helping that person. I think you're encouraging their mental illness. What could be more blasphemous than saying, I deny, the natural gift that I've been given to create another human being by destroying your genitals? I mean, is there anything more blasphemous? I don't think so. And take God out of it, take religion out of it. It's a defiance of nature. I mean, your body is a sacred thing, and if you choose to mutilate it, of course, yeah, that's your choice. But why would you choose to mutilate it? I mean, pagans worship nature. That's what paganism is. It's idolatry. It's taking a tree and saying, I worship you, tree. And of course, when they cut down the tree, you become very sad, right? They clear cut the trees. Oh no, save the trees. But cut your penis off? That's okay? Anyway, this is a very vast topic. It wasn't my intention to cover the entirety of it. I just wanted to hit some certain points that I had thoughts about.